Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna get started. I'm Leslie Black-Flo at Vermont Housing Finance Agency. We've got some other VHFA staff here today, and we've got VHCB staff who are nice enough to secure this room for us to use today in centrally located Montpelier. So there's coffee and tea, all the things we need to have a meeting, both on Zoom and in person, thanks to VHCB. From VHFA, I have Nate Lantieri, the research coordinator, here with me today. We're going to be presenting some results of a program evaluation. Deb Flannery, our managing director of community development, is here, and Neil Watson, who works with Deb on these programs, and Jameson from VHFA, also here, who's working with me and Deb. So I don't want to take too much time. I do want you all to let us know that you're here. So I'm going to pass around a sign-in sheet. And we can make materials available after. And we do want to record this meeting. Yep. Okay, so the meeting is being recorded because we want to be able to hear feedback from you all today about how these homeownership development programs are working. And the recording will help us make sure that we are able to reflect and consider all the valuable things that you have, that you can bring to us today, and the benefits of your experience that you can tell us about. So we'll also be able to make the recording available to folks who miss it if they want to get in touch with us. We can do that. So we're going to do a review of a program evaluation that Nate and I conducted last year. And then we're going to talk about both of the programs a little bit and what their activity levels have been lately. And then the bulk of our time together today will be to hear from you all about what's working and what could be more effective in these programs, and then talk about how we're going to move forward. So thanks for passing down the sign-in sheet. I'll get that later. We did invite all of the regional nonprofit homeownership centers to be with us today, as well as all the Habitat chapters and a couple of developers who had been interested in learning more about the middle income program, as well as the statewide agencies, so VHCB and VHFA and VHCD. So thank you for being here. Okay, so Nate and I are going to tell you a little bit about what we've found so far in this evaluation of the SHOTC homes that had closed as of 2025. So we're going to just for a minute put aside middle income and just put our SHOTC glasses on and look at how that program, because that program is the longest standing homeownership development program that VHFA has been in the state. So what we did in this program, it's a lot of words, but what these words are about is that we only looked at the homes for which disbursements had been made through 2025. So things that are in the pipeline, haven't been dispersed yet, we did not include those in our study group. We relied exclusively on settlement statements and the other data that you all had submitted to us over the years. And then also recently, when I asked for some additional data, you were able to provide that to me in late 2025. For buyer information, buyer information, we only have the reported household income. We don't have a lot of details at VHFA about the home buyers. So that keeps us looking at a kind of a bird's eye view of what's going on with the program. We look at their reported taxable household income, their household size, and the other information that's on settlement statements about subsidies that are flowing into the deal. We did look at resales. I'm not going to talk about that today because we don't have enough information yet about the buyers that were involved when the homes resold, but we're in the process of putting that together, and VHCB has also done some looking at that. And so we'll be be doing a little more work to wrap that up, but we're not gonna talk a lot about, from VHFA's side, we're not gonna talk a lot about, what we found. We looked at the resales. So we looked at 183 homes that were sold. That's how many homes had been sold. And money was dispersed from the time the program began in 2009 through the end of 2025. The average cost per home to the state of Vermont through the SHOTC itself during that time was $37,000. And the total cost to the state and a few other funders that were involved of the SHOTC homes was $121,000 on average during that time period. So there were additional subsidies at work in these home closings. And this is another slide that just shows how the additional subsidies have been involved with the SHOTC program over the years. Prior to 2020, there was about $35,500 in SHOTC money going into each home, and about $17,000 in additional subsidy types that were going into each home. And then in 2020, that went up. The SHOTC program went up a little bit to $40,000 per home. And the total amount went up to about $225,000 per home on average. So the homes for which SHOTC funds were dispersed between 2020 and 2025 involved on average about $225,000 in public subsidies. Some of that is explained by the increase in construction costs. Construction costs did go up a dramatic amount between the pre-2020 period and the post-2020 period. If the subsidies had kind of increased the way the construction costs increased on average, we would have been at about 100,000 in total subsidies per home. So we looked again at all 183 homes that had been funded since 2009. And that's actually a typo on the location. That should be 2025 instead of 2009, instead of 2015. So it's 2009 through 2025. The location of the homes is statewide, although 80% of them are in Chittenden County. And all of the homes recently have been in Chittenden County, for which funds were dispersed as of 2025. Oh yeah, I forgot to say, we're talking about the shared equity homes right now, not the mobile home replacement program, the shared equity home piece of the SHOTC program. And we're going to talk a little bit about the mobile home replacement program, which was added in 2014, I think, after we finished talking about the shared equity portion. But we really did most of our work so far to look at how the shared equity side of the SHOTC program has worked over the years. So those shared equity homes have been developed primarily by CHT. Those are the yellow pieces of the pie, and along with smaller amount of development by the other nonprofits. So this slide is an attempt to kind of look at how SHOTC has impacted or is likely to impact the current need that we see in the state for homes, owner-occupied homes that are affordable to households that make under 120% of the area median income. We have estimated when we did the housing needs assessment recently that in the next 5 years, we're going to need statewide close to 7,000 for sale homes, 7,000 additional for sale homes in the state of Vermont that are affordable at this level. And that we need about 4,700 of those outside of Chittenden County, and we need about 2,000 of those in Chittenden County. So if we were to continue at the pace that we've been at the last 5 years, we would meet about 2% of that need in Chittenden County. We wouldn't meet any of it in the other parts of the state because we haven't been doing any any SHOTC funded homes in other parts of the state as of 2025. And that would put us at statewide about a 1% reach for this program into meeting the 5-year needs. These are some words about the 30% affordability standard, explaining how we use it as researchers to identify housing needs. It's a very broad brush assumption that has been in play for decades in the housing world. And it is not right for every family, but it is a very useful standard that is used.
To New York. New York.
It's used both in research and to identify gaps that require public subsidies at the federal level in particular, and other public funders assume that there is a need for public subsidies when a home buyer or a renter would be forced to spend more than 30% of their income for housing. So the next slide shows that 30%. The line kind of sunk a little. The yellow line is the 30% standard. If housing expenses are shown on the vertical axis and household income on the horizontal axis. And ideally, in a perfect world, nobody would spend more than 30% of their income for their housing. What we see with this program, each of these dots is one of the 183 SHOTC homes for which we had household income data and housing expense data. For those homes, we can see that there is a cluster around the 30% mark, but there are home buyers that spent more than well over 30% of their income for their housing, and home buyers who spent less than 30% of their income for their housing. And in fact, it's actually a similar line as we see in the private market, whereby the higher your income is, the lower your cost burden. And that really stayed the same with SHOTC. We didn't level the line the way it might be ideal, but again, this is a bird's eye view, doesn't consider other kinds of debt. We don't have that information at VHFA. We don't really try to look at each home buyer's situation aside from a broad brush look at their housing expenses and their total household income, regardless of whether the income was over time, just looking at what they had reported as of the time of closing. So I'm gonna let Nate tell you a little bit about what we found on the use of SHOTC for the manufactured housing replacement program.
Yeah, we only did a kind of a briefer review of the manufactured home program, but that was additionally added post flooding in 2013 to be a replacement option for manufactured homes throughout the state. In that time, there have been 400 homes that have been replaced, and in the last 5 years, about 200 of them. The cost of the state's pretty similar, about $32,000 compared to the $37,000 from the stick-built SHOTC. And whereas most of the development has been in Chittenden County through that side of the program, most of the manufactured home replacements have been throughout the state. And you can kind of see that in the next slide. That goes to show, so those are clustered by town, so it's the number of manufactured homes that have been replaced by town throughout the state. Some slight concentration in Washington County compared to some areas in the southern part of the state, but much more spread out kind of geographically. Yeah, mostly it. And then to kind of think about some of the comparison for needs, similar to what Leslie had shared about the overall need for homes. Just did a kind of a quick proxy from some American Community Survey data about older manufactured homes, so those that were built between 60 and 80. It's not exactly the right time period for homes that'll need to be replaced, but something that can kind of give us some grounding. That's where we get that there are about, let's say 8,000 homes that are likely in need of replacement around the state. SHOTC has been able to replace about that 400 in the last 5 years. So that's where we get to that. that percentage.
And I asked, have you looked at all that, who the buyers are, what their incomes are?
We have for the manufacturer, yeah.
And you may want to also talk to the housing authority who did a presentation, but my understanding is the average buyer is spending about 75,000 and has an income that's in that range as well. So
Okay.
I think we're seeing kind of similar trends, people not wanting to be maxed out.
Yeah.
In terms of their debt.
Yeah, that actually is one of the problems or challenges of doing this evaluation was that we didn't have a lot of data. We didn't have any household income data for not a good number of the homes that were sold, and we weren't able to get household income data that was reliable on the mobile home replacement program side. And it just took a lot of diving. We just scoured the PDFs that you all have provided over the years to try to pull out really, really basic bits of information about whether we are complying with program regulations as a state and whether we are achieving our outcomes. So I'm looking forward to improvements to how that data flows into VHFA as a funder going forward, and I think it'll make it a lot easier for us all to see how well we're achieving our goals with this program going forward. So more on that. Oh yeah, I guess on the resale, we've really been in the dark about that. We haven't had any data provided by you all in an ongoing way. We were able to get data from CHT when I requested it at the end of 2025. We did most of our work on resales by trying to match addresses to the property transfer tax data about all the homes that had sold. So we were able to determine how many homes had resold that way, but we don't really know anything about the buyers statewide of resold Shotzi homes. So we'll be excited about improving that in the future. Now I'm going to turn it over to, well, actually, before we do that.
Do we want to take questions on this?
Oh, yeah, we should take
Yeah,
questions.
yeah.
I'm also going to pass around, VHCB did a look at their entire shared equity homeownership program, and you got this like email, yeah. We're gonna pass that around. That was something that we got yesterday, but I think it's about a broader scope of homes, but generally shared equity, how that's been working when they were able to look back at their information.
And we got a question from Elizabeth Bridgewater online, and it was, in calculating the total subsidies, this is on the construction side, or does this include down payment subsidies for the buyers?
Yeah, the evaluation, we included all the subsidies, regardless of the kind of subsidy that it was.
I have a follow-up question there, Bruce Whitney with Wyndham and Windsor Housing Trust. Did you look at how much the value gap or the appraisal gap between construction costs and actual appraised value affected that? Because that's what we're seeing, is that gap is getting really, really big, while the buyer subsidy is, about the same.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. We did look at that. We didn't include a slide here, but what you're noting was definitely true. The gap is that value gap was a significant part of the increase that we experienced in those more recently closed homes, for sure.
Thanks.
I have a question. In regards to the mobile home program, you were talking a little bit about on the slides about replacement. Are those actually ones that have sold as well? Because I know that there are quite a few that
Yeah, so it's the entire,
so sold and.
yeah, sold and replaced, yeah.
It's kind of more foundational, I guess, to know better, or understand better. Leslie, you mentioned, outcomes and goals. And I assume that you've made the changes that have come about because it wasn't meeting your goals or your outcome. And so what was it that wasn't being met that the new program is designed to meet?
We don't have a new program. What we have is an existing program that we are. Layering with a new program. So the state homeownership tax credit program that this evaluation is about is not a new program. It does dovetail and overlap with another new program, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute, which is the middle income homeownership
Yeah.
development program, right? So those two programs have different criteria for allocating resources. And when you lay them over each other, there were starting to be some conflicts. So that created an impetus for us to look at those things together so that we would have some internal consistency as an agency and how we're evaluating the subsidy levels and making sure that we were not over subsidizing them. So that's.
So the tax credit was the existing program, I understand that, but the modifications that are now required or that are put in place that were not there before are in an effort to make a more consistent application between the two programs?
And also because there's a lot more money, as we saw, that's coming into the projects. We hadn't had a practice of even really sizing the gaps. We were creating more of a pass-through structure where we just relied on the sponsors to tell us what the funds were, and we couldn't even really account for whether it was, and we still even struggle with this, whether it was value gap or it was affordability gap, because we were just paying invoices almost without a lot of review or scrutiny. And so that as we started to look at that more clearly, because we needed to, for the sake of administering the middle income program, which had discrete categories that we were, had federal guidelines around having to document. And we then had to be tightening up the review process in order to make that work.
And so did that come down from a mandate where these funds were allocated? In other words, I assume that the motivation is to meet mandates where the funding came from. Or are you saying, no, we decided internally, not the state of Vermont and these funds that are put into this pool?
So let me just say that the program didn't really change. There's nothing that's new in the grant agreements. The grant agreements have always said this is to secure affordability for the home buyer, or is to secure value gap. And that determination is to be made based on it. You can find the language in the grant agreements or the tax credit agreements, whichever you may be talking about, which says VHFA will review this and it will determine that it has sufficient documentation to prove this. We historically did not really require or look at that kind of documentation. So when we started looking at it, it started to produce some different results, but it wasn't a change in the program. It was just us undertaking a bit more of a activist role in our oversight of what we were doing. Because one, we had staff turnover, so some of us were just coming in new and being like, I have an invoice to pay. What do I need to have to back that up? Our finance team was coming to us saying, we have been uncomfortable for a while that we don't have good information, and now that we have these new ARPA dollars coming into play, and you're asking us to pay dispersed funds, we want to see that audit trail that's gonna come with these meet the criteria for the programs. So that there was about the same time I arrived a little over a year ago, that sort of internal controls, program integrity kind of imperative started coming to me from our internal finance team. And so it just it resulted in some different analysis that and lenses that we can bring to the table.
Thank you.
It just may be helpful for the people who are watching online or participating online for us to identify ourselves as we speak, because they're just looking at big one. So I'm just sealing for the Housing Conservation Board, whether you're just watching, that planning, responding to questions, giving them habitat, but it may be helpful. I don't know how many people are online. but
Yeah.
Thank you.
Several.
And I see Ashley has their hand raised. Ashley, if you have a question, you can unmute.
Awesome, thanks. My question was just about the mobile home replacement program. I have done several projects through the CHT mobile home replacement fund successfully over the last 10 years. And now I'm running into an issue where I guess the standards about what year the replacement home could be, like, for example, that you can't use those funds 2024 manufactured or zero energy modular home, that has to be a 2025 or 2026 brand new home. Could you guys, and I'm hearing that those regulations are coming from VHFA. So yeah, I'm just wondering if you could speak to that and why that change and if there's any wiggle room around that.
Ashley, one thing I was thinking is we're having a little trouble hearing you. One thing I'd love to do is just wrap up questions that are about the evaluation. We didn't look like I don't have any information about that from the evaluation standpoint because we have very little data on the mobile homes that were replaced through the program, aside from where they are and how much subsidy was provided. And so I'm gonna have to I'm gonna have to maybe get back to you, but I'm not sure I completely heard your question. Can you hold on to it so that we can finish any other questions about the evaluation? And then we'll have time for questions and feedback about program changes or how the program has been working for you recently in just a little bit. Any other questions about the evaluation? Then I'm going to turn it over to Deb. She's going to talk a little bit about what both programs, both the middle income program and the SHOTC program have been doing for the state of Vermont. And then we'll go to feedback.
Thank you all. This is Deb Flannery again. And Ashley, just to say, I know Leslie sort of.
There was actually one more hand before.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Elizabeth, would you like to ask a question before we move on?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, it's a little slow getting my hand raised. Just to get back to my question about the division of the subsidies, do you have that breakdown and could send that to us as a follow-up? Because I think it would be really helpful to see the trend of the development subsidies versus the buyer subsidies, because you've got it sounds like you grouped it all into one number. And it rose significantly over the last 5 years. So I think the breakdown would be helpful to take a look at if you have those as a follow-up item.
We do. The more granular the data, then the less, the fewer the homes for which we are reporting out on. So we didn't include details when I didn't feel like we had enough homes to make some assumptions. But we did capture the source of the subsidies. And I can share that with you, Elizabeth, but you'll see how many homes we have it for and how we.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. And just wanted to say, Kathy, just so you know, you are unmuted and we're getting a little bit of feedback. But other than that, I think we can pass it over to Deb.
Thank you. Again, Deb Flannery. With VHFA, I oversee the development finance origination team, which is headed up by Megan Rausch, and I also oversee the asset management group, which is Kim Roy. And so between those, that's kind of my scope of oversight. It includes all of our housing development finance, and then our back end compliance work. So that's what I do. I'm replacing the legendary Seth Leonard. As of a year ago, I have been very internally focused for this whole first year, in part because we have had just a flood of new programs that have been launched. And so I wanted to share like the context for me coming into the HFA was at a moment where we had received $90 million, let's just say, of additional program money with new requirements. And it was like 24 million of middle income money, a $10 million rental revolving loan fund money. It was $56 million of LIAC funds. And then a smattering of others with capital magnet funds in the mix, some treasury and some other things. All to say, we had not just a lot of money to get through our system, but we also had some new programs and new requirements that we then had to grapple with. At the time I arrived a year ago, there had been a lot of grand announcements about conditional funding commitments, but there had been almost none of that money actually dispersed through our accounting group and into projects. So when I got here, it was like everybody was rating it, chomping at the bit, and like our projects are now ready to draw on funds. And so we're a little behind, I think, in the sense that maybe partly because there were a few months between when Seth left and when I joined, We had some other staff turnover involved, so we sort of started this year a little on our back foot in terms of being prepared for all of that. That flood of new programs and new requirements and internal, looking at things. And we've been in catch-up mode pretty much all year. So this is the first time I'm out here. I'm acknowledging that I would have loved to have been doing a lot more of this kind of conversation and having more interactions with all of you. But just to share that context, I did take seriously and had felt a lot of urgency around not slowing down the deployment of the funds, and also making sure that we met some key deadlines to get those funds into the system before they would expire. So with that in mind, I wanted to just highlight that we're talking, Leslie and Nate have shared a lot about the SHOTC, or the homeownership tax credit program, in the evaluation itself. But we also have braided that together with the middle income homeownership development program. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit, do a little bit of compare and contrast between the two. The SHOTC program was created in 2009, as they said earlier. It is an annual tax credit authority that the legislature has pre-authorized, which is a total of $675,000 per year for 5 years with each annual allocation, which equals, that little math is up there, about $3.4 million a year of tax credit authority. That doesn't translate to the same amount when it comes to the program investments, though, because we have to sell those tax credits to investors. So instead of where for rental housing, the developer will go and find a syndicator to sell those tax credits. In the case of these programs, VHFA actually does that. So our CFO goes to banks and community investors to get tax credit proceeds that then become grants to the projects. So we see on average a pricing of about 90 cents on the dollar. So that means that on a typical year with the current authorization, we end up with over $3 million to put into projects in the form of grant money. Over the life of the program, because it has started at one level, it moves up, or it added something over time. Since 2009, we've had some changes. In total, what's been authorized by the legislature for these tax credits is almost $32 million. So it's a significant infusion of resources that we've been really pleased to be able to participate in. And we thank you all for also turning that into homes for people. That program was really geared and has been geared exclusively to the shared equity models and the perpetual affordability model, really thinking about deep affordability and the like as its foundational purpose. And that's a bit different from what we've seen in the middle income homeownership program, which had a sort of, it retains some of that as a priority, but it also has other purposes. So the middle income program was created much more recently in 2023. Awards were made in a couple of cycles in 23 and 24 by VHFA. We really hadn't spent more than maybe $500,000 before the end of 2024 of this money, the 24 million total. But in 2025 now we've had to ramp up because we have a good chunk of this money that is, as you'll see, the source is ARPA funds, which have a March 31st deadline, which we can clap, we have achieved. So we have dispersed all of the ARPA money as of this date and have satisfied that requirement. So that was a big motivator for us to kind of prioritize getting all the documentation that we would need and getting funds out the door for projects. So the internal focus that I mentioned earlier. And an additional 9 million of it was a state appropriation. So that's what's making up those funds. That program, instead of being just a statute, as the state ownership program is by statute allocated or identified that VHFA is the administrator directly. Under the middle income program, we actually have a grant agreement with DHCD for those funds. So we are subject to all of the attendant ARPA requirements plus other things in a detailed grant agreement that we have accountability to DHCD for directly. And we, with that program, we have the ability to not only fund the housing pipeline after it's been completed, and we have historically done with tax credits on a reimbursement basis after closing. We get the invoices from you all. With the middle income program, we've been able to step out a little beyond that and do construction financing and convert it at the end. So we've done that in a few cases, not in every case. But we needed to actually accelerate the pace of those funds going out the door, and that was a critical way that we were able to do that. But again, it added a layer of some degree of complexity for us. and some challenges, something we hadn't been doing previously that we did. We did it both to accommodate all of you and the needs that you have as partners, and also to get the, to satisfy the ARPA deadline, make sure we didn't lose those funds. But it is a difference in the way that that program works that we've embedded, and we have now seen some real benefits from, and would like to be able to continue to do that to the extent that we have resources to allow that. Let's see, anything else? Yeah, I would just say too that we also are, so while we are funding this during construction, and we are able to do so with our own balance sheet capital, we do not get the funds up front. We only get reimbursed once we've satisfied all the grant conditions for DHCD purposes. So that's another service that VHFA is actually able to provide to the system, because it takes sometimes several months before we even get a reimbursement from the state. So we don't make you all wait for that. We fund the projects even during construction, and wait till we get the final documentation of eligibility, and then we ultimately will get reimbursed, we hope. But it's all subject to us having the proper documentation to satisfy the attestation that we've used it for its intended purpose. The other thing about the difference between middle income and safe ownership credits is that the middle income program is available to for-profit developers and for properties that are not to be retained as perpetually affordable, though 33% of those funds are reserved for perpetually affordable models. So, but a considerable amount is for other types of partners, which is also new for us. So having to think about what that might look like differently from what we've done in the past has also been something that we've been catching up on, I would say, and trying to understand better, because I mean, I can just say, for example, a for-profit developer that is not a homeownership center does not have internal loan officers to do down payment loans or grants or administer things like that. And so we've had to kind of think differently about that. And it's, again, been an area where we have had some learnings and some hiccups, and we are continuing to kind of iterate and try to improve on that. I don't have that many slides, don't worry, and I'm gonna try to talk fast. This is another key difference, but I just wanted to highlight it here, and it may speak a little bit to some of the questions around affordability gap, value gap that have surfaced in this evaluation question. Technically and historically, the state homeownership credit was reserved only for affordability gap. That was because the statute requires that it be secured. And you can't secure a value gap because there's no value to be secured. So affordability gap is the bread and butter of the state homeownership tax credit program. I will say it's possible we funded inadvertently some value gap because we weren't really parsing it quite in this way. But the definition of terms is up here, and it's, the affordable home cost is, the home value or the appraised value, and the difference between that and what a household at a given income can afford is affordability gap. The difference between the home value and the cost to construct is the value gap. I'm talking to all of you, you know this. But that value gap piece, we were not really authorized to serve in the prior program. And with middle income, that has been a very important use. And I think those numbers, based on some of the preliminary information we have, the value gaps have grown, making it more difficult to, generate the kind of production that folks have believed, the legislature believes the state needs, which again was one of the reasons why they created this middle income program. So that program goes up to serving households at 150% AMI, which is pretty far above, our standard and traditional views of homeownership affordability. Whereas the state tax credit is capped at 120% AMI. So as I said, we've been very busy and focused this year on dispersing funds. And so we just have this, this sort of over time, what our activity levels have been, just to kind of demonstrate for you that the last two are not 2 full years. The last two is 2025 and so far in 2026. So what that really reflects is in the last 12 months, it's more than, 15.5 million dollars that we put out the door in the last, call it 12 months or approximately so. And in the prior, 5 years, the average was 1.8 or something in that category. So that's like a 7.5-fold increase. And that's corresponding with an increase in production. So we went from maybe 10 units a year to more than 70 in the last year. And so that is where we've been spending our time. And it might not look like a lot of money in a certain sense, But when it's going, home closing by home closing, that's very different than if we're just putting money out the door in a one-time transaction. So it's taken a lot of time, and I really want to acknowledge Mia. Mia comes to this work kind of new. She's done a lot of other things in her career, but this was a new territory for her. She was brave and leapt in and has really shown a lot of curiosity and interest and sincerity in trying to do the best work she can to make this program work. So Mia, thank you. And you all have talked with her, so I hope you've all appreciated that, but that is largely the work of Mia. And I also say most of that money went out the door since July. So we're really talking about a lot of throughput capacity that we have had to generate internally, and we have not always been perfect. We have not always covered all the bases. But I just wanted to keep that in mind as we're understanding where we might have had some struggles in terms of being able to be as proactive in some of our communication, our materials as we would have liked to have been. But the good news is that means we got all the ARPA money into projects, and so we're really pleased about that. So, and thank you for your grace and patience as we've done all of this. Let's see. So I do also want to just give a quick update here, and I promise I am almost done. On the FY26 awards, because we had a lot of discussion at our September board meeting when we ended up making those awards about a slightly different approach. What we asked our board to authorize was to authorize what you see on the list on the bottom right of that screen are in black print are the projects that we asked the board to authorize awards for, and then we asked them to reserve some delegation of authority to the staff through its senior staff credit committee to provide any supplemental awards that we could justify after having further dialogue with partners. Because we did feel like, because we had been in such a vortex of trying to learn and develop and adapt, that we hadn't had enough, we hadn't kind of given enough attention and really got dug in on some of these projects and didn't want to have them wait a whole year. So at the end, so far, what we've done is we've met with all the applicants, tried to kind of understand what might be some opportunities for us to supplementally fund things. One has officially been approved. There are a few others still sort of pending. But that one that is in green is Shell Beach. And we did authorize the full amount that was requested for that through our credit committee process. So it was, just wanted to give that update to folks. I also want to just reflect on the left is kind of the distribution of funds. So we can just see here, like all of the green, that's all money that's going through either the lighter green is the manufactured home replacement amount, and the dark green is with just CHT with the Shell Beach, and then the rest is what has gone to other partners. And then this is just a reflection of some of what I think Leslie has identified as a bit of a lag between when we make awards and when funds go out the door. And we have over the last, 3 cycles, had over $9 million. We aren't counting 26 yet because that's just kind of barely getting started. But the FY 20 through 25, $9 million roughly, as we said, about $3 million a year. The amount dispersed is, 5.2 million so far, and we're sitting on 42% of that. Those tax credit proceeds still. So we have more than a full year's worth of money to be dispersed still. So just to be clear, we do have resources, and to the extent that we have some recaptures or some unspent funds from this past cycle, when we come to the next round, we'll be rolling that all in and trying to make some allocations so there's timely projects that are ready for those dollars. And then this gets into a bit of some of the conversation that was started with your question earlier. And it just reflects that VHFA is taking a slightly more active role in exercising its oversight responsibilities. I did not come in January and decide it's time to bring the hammer down at all. I came in and my mindset was, this is a well-oiled machine. Following don't do anything in the first 90 days. I actually said, this is so all good that I don't need to do anything in the first 6 months. I want to just sit and absorb and learn. And I wasn't able to do that because we had this middle income money coming in and we were seeing it layered on top of other projects, and we were getting pushback on whether we had documented it adequately in order to get the reimbursement of the federal dollars for the program. So I I felt, and we had staff leave too that were running these programs, so we had a gap that I had to jump in and start working. So it just sort of accelerated the pace of some of what we needed to do here, in ways that I think has been felt, and maybe we can share more later, but, you know, seemed like some kind of dramatic, big change that was a scheme or a plan that I had coming in, and it definitely was not. So, what we are doing is we are developing and have developed in some areas, policies and procedures that, you know, really better align the way we operate with the program objectives along the lines that Leslie's been kind of pointing to in the evaluation. We've been applying a more consistent methodology for determining the funding gaps between value and affordability and really understanding what that looks like and how much it should be. We are building more integrated systems to track and report program data. We establishing standardized documentation requirements as what Leslie and Nate found in their review of the disbursement records, which is where we keep all of the backup for an audit trail, is that it was pretty widely varying depending on who was submitting it. We didn't have formats and forms in which to provide it. We still are working to develop that, but it makes it very difficult to have apples to apples comparisons. So working on that is another thing that we're doing now actively looking to improve on. And we are also getting, laying the groundwork to be able to monitor projects over time, because we historically have not done that. We, in the multifamily space or in the rental housing space, we have a very clear process where we have the origination side with the, get the project to closing and completion. And then there is a handoff to the asset management team that I run. So there's a nice division of labor and a focus area. And then that project gets monitored over time. There's annual reporting, there's different site visits, there's all kinds of things that happen on the rental side. None of that is happening on this. So there's not then I'm ready to check them back with folks every year on their grants. Where is this standing? It's been a little bit ad hoc and very with long lags between. So that's something that we're working to develop consistently as well. So those are some of the ways that VHFA is looking to improve in its execution of its responsibilities, and trying to strike that balance between doing all those things and maintaining some flexibility and maintaining efficiencies and all the things that we all want. That's it for my. Yeah. Oh, yes, okay. Sorry, so policies and procedures, one of the core documents that is mandated in the statute that where we have obligation to publish and seek public input and have a dedicated approval process is the qualified allocation plan. We all know that for the federal LIHTC program is a requirement, but in the statute for the state tax credits, it refers to this same process. And it basically spells out that needs to include eligibility criteria, selection priorities, a process for selection of projects, program compliance requirements, in particular around maintaining and documenting affordability over time. And it requires it to be recommended by the Joint Committee on Tax Credits. So we are currently, as we posted, working on the QAP. We have engaged a consulting firm of Noah Braddock, a nationally recognized expert on tax credits, to help us with that process. We're preparing to issue our draft on mid-March and the 17th to be precise, we hope. And with a 30-day public comment period to be announced and a hearing on April 6th. So kind of right in the middle of that time frame. Where we will be hosting a hybrid meeting. Folks can show up, folks can join electronically, and we'll be also transcribing the notes from that conversation. So we will use that as our forum to gather input. So this may be something you all want to pay attention to if you haven't been active in rental housing, but just to know that this is a document and a process that we'll be following. Yeah, and then we'll be posting and having it once we hopefully get a recommendation, after accepting and incorporating any feedback that we receive, bringing it to the Joint Committee on Tax Credits, which is that required step in May, and then to our board, and then that's the conclusion. Then it will be effective after that point in time for future funding rounds.
Super. under an hour. But we have a whole nother hour and we really are excited to hear from you all. Like Deb was just saying, this is a perfect time because we are preparing revisions to this qualified allocation plan where Vermont identifies as priorities for all housing credit allocations, including the state homeownership tax credit. And so what I want to suggest is that if you need a break, take a break. There is coffee and water, and Nate is demoing how to do this. There are bathrooms, there's one here, there's one there. But we'll push through as a group, but you will just all need to take care of yourselves as you need. And for the remainder of our time together, we would love to hear from you all. About your experiences. And I would encourage, like Gus reminded us, the folks on Zoom can't see us. I don't even know you all. So it would be really great to identify ourselves before we speak. Also, the folks on Zoom, if you could please identify yourselves before you speak, that'd be great. And we'll just raise hands and make sure that we all have a chance to hear each other.
I would love to start. Thank you so much for all of the information and the context. Good morning, I'm Angie Harbin. I'm the Executive Director for Downstreet Housing and Community Development, and we serve Orange, Washington, and Lamoille counties. So to make the most efficient use of our limited time together, the affordable housing developers coordinated our thoughts. And I think it would be helpful for us to present that information cohesively, recognizing we are not the only people in the room. And once we're done, we are very eager to hear from other affordable housing developers and then also hear VHFA's response. And what we're presenting today reflects decades of creating and stewarding permanently affordable homeownership in Vermont. So we're going to briefly walk through how we define affordable homeownership, how we underwrite and price a home, and how we think about SHOTC and shared equity from the perspectives of a developer, of a steward, and of lending partners. We're happy to follow up with anything that we share today, obviously in writing, and or provide any additional data or specific examples. So our goals, which I'm pretty sure we all share, are to build durable, energy efficient homes as cost effectively as possible, so we can serve the greatest number of households that are shut out from the open market. And then also we want to ensure that those buyers are positioned for long-term financial stability once they become homeowners. And so when we think about affordable housing or affordable homeownership, we're defining it as, homeowners having the resources to maintain their homes and make necessary timely repairs. Homeowners being able to afford both their housing costs and their other financial responsibilities. So these are the student loans, childcare, transportation, healthcare, those everyday living expenses. And then finally, we're thinking of it as homeowners feeling secure and financially stable without the constant stress of worrying about how they make next month's mortgage payment. This is why we all do affordable housing, right? And this definition of affordable homeownership is supported by several core components within each of our programs. We offer permanent affordability through shared equity. We provide home ownership support across the full life cycle. So this is helping households prepare to buy, guiding them through the purchase process, supporting them while they live in their homes, and assisting them through the resale process when the household is ready to transition to another home. And then we offer programs that support lower income homeowners who need access to grants and low to no cost loans to make needed repairs in their homes. So we've been doing this for more than 40 years. And this network has helped Vermonters become successful, stable homeowners in communities all across the state. As place-based organizations, we have local knowledge of our unique markets and are positioned to help our community members succeed in their goals within that context. I think we all know this, that Vermont markets vary widely. In some markets, housing costs are lower, but the housing stock needs extensive repairs. In others, prices for new and existing homes, condos, and single family alike continue to climb, making homeownership increasingly cost prohibitive. And then in many communities, there's simply not enough housing available at any price point, and that's leaving low and moderate income buyers with practically no options. And across all of these varying markets, we have been able to support Vermonters getting ready to buy, engaging our network of local lenders to bring mortgage opportunities to our buyers, and then to provide permanently affordable homes for multiple generations of homeowners in our space. And then I'm gonna kick it to Cheryl Moyer to talk a little bit more about the more technical aspects of what we do.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Cheryl Moyer, I'm the Director of Homeownership at Downstreet. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about the buyer's underwriting process that we go through with our shared equity homeowners. We underwrite applicants to our shared equity program pursuant to thoughtful financing policies that serve the dual purpose of making sure the households can afford homeownership and make sure that the homes will be a lasting asset for affordable homeownership in our community. Our underwriting mirrors that of a mortgage lender. People cannot buy a shared equity home without a mortgage. Like a mortgage underwriter, we look at households' financial picture. What will be their actual costs? Taxes, mortgage payments, homeowner association, insurance, CLT fees. How much debt do they have? And will they be able to sustain the burden of additional debt in the form of a mortgage payment? This includes looking at student loans, car payments, and other credit used by the household. In instances where there are multiple eligible applicants for a shared equity home, selection policies like those of CHT can grant preference to lower income buyers to ensure fairness and equity to meet objectives of serving households at the greatest need. And then I'm going to pass it on to Andrew, who's going to talk a little bit more.
Yeah, so, one of the criteria that we're really sort of focused on, so let me introduce myself, sorry. Andrew Winter, Executive Director at Twin Pines Housing, and although I'm the Executive Director, I work very closely with our homeownership program manager in Hill, who was not able to be here in person today. We're an active developer in developing new housing. We have worked with VHFA on 4 homes. Mia's been involved working with Ann on 4 homes, and I see just Newbold here from Evernorth, who is our partner in developing 4 homes out at Cyber Commons in Woodstock. As a developer, one of the real issues that we've been sort of focusing in on is the need for certainty around pricing. And that is something that is important to us as a developer. We need to be able to set pricing before we start construction so that we can count on the resources needed to pay for the project. This involves making assumptions around interest rates and marketability. It also includes a high degree of risk that if the home is not able to be sold or takes longer to sell than modeled, the organization will have a significant holding cost to bear. And that has been a challenge for the affordable housing community in terms of the development of new homes. And that is something that we're trying to mitigate by having some certainty around sales price. We need to set the home prices upfront, be able to market homes to a broad pool of applicants. And again, as just discussed, one of the things that we try to do is ensure that we're giving a preference in the selection if we've got multiple buyers. The reality is, in many of the more rural parts of the state, we don't always have multiple buyers, and it can take longer to market a unit. But we need to be able to do it with a set price, which I know is something that we've been discussing and wanted to kind of raise as an issue. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Julie to talk about the stewardship process.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm Julie Curtin, the Director of Homeownership for Champlain Housing Trust. And as you can see, Champlain Housing Trust has a lot of experience with the program, and we're very grateful for this resource to be able to bring shared equity homes to our service area. CHT's been doing shared equity housing for over 40 years. So we've seen a lot of these homes go through the resale process. And that's always something on our minds as a steward of these resources, homeowners, and these homes. Because we're supporting, as part of the service that we're providing through the program, is that we help manage that resale process when someone's ready to move on from their shared equity home. Participants in the program do agree to receiving a reduced amount of the appreciation in their home as an exchange for participating in the program, where they get significant down payment assistance. And so part of what we can bring for them is support in being able to sell that home when they're ready to move on. The subsidy covenant needs to allow buyers of high enough income to provide that buyer pool available for our sellers when they're ready to sell their home. And that really helps maintain the goal of the program, which is to help people buy a home where they wouldn't otherwise be able to buy one in a high cost market. Through our experience, we've found that that it's important to price homes for affordability around 70% of area median income, which will sustain that affordability over time throughout resales. We've also found that it's important to allow eligibility up to 120% of area median income, to allow flexibility in the size of households buying these homes, and acknowledge that today's buyers in this market often have student debt, car payments, and other financial burdens that makes it challenging to purchase a home. And we're also just seeing in our market, homes generally priced so high that even people with higher incomes, up to 120%, are priced out of the open market. I'm going to pass it back to Cheryl, who's a licensed mortgage lender, to give a bit of the lender perspective.
Sharon Ware, work at Down Street again, sorry. So talking a little bit about the first mortgage lenders, including yourselves, VHFA, offer other forms of down payment or buyer-driven down payment assistance programs. These are additional grants or forgivable loans in some instances to cover closing costs and further reduce the amount that a household needs to borrow to buy a home. There is often an income eligibility requirement, first-time home buyer and or other demographic criteria to determine eligibility in these additional subsidies. Buyers must have a home under contract and therefore already know the purchase price. And other identifying their first mortgage lender before being able to receive awards for these programs. These subsidies totally depend on buyer eligibility and funding availability. Therefore, the SHOT C funds homes cannot be priced with the assumption that a buyer will be successful in obtaining these additional buyer-specific benefits, where buyers do have these forms of down payment assistance. The result is a lower mortgage payment and therefore lower percentage of their income spent on housing. Given that many of these programs are designed to repair historic injustices and discrimination in our housing system, this results of wealth building for these households is exactly what they're intended for. And I'm going to pass it on to Elise.
Yeah, this is on screen. So let me just make sure that y'all are able to see that.
Hi, can you see and hear me?
I can see you, no one else can see you, but we can all hear you. Yeah.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I really wanted to be there in person. It was not to be. Apologies for joining late from my car. But I'm Elise Schanbecker. I'm the executive director of Edison Housing Works, and I really just want to underscore that we appreciate being here today. I appreciate being here today. And agree that we want to look at the data so that we can be doing the best that we can by Vermonters with our homeownership goals and our homeownership programs, and that we do share the same goals. And our ability to provide permanent affordability really does depend on us all working together as a network and with VHFA and having a trusting and mutually respectful relationship. I really appreciated, hearing that, you came in, Deb, to a well-oiled machine. And I appreciate that, and I just want to continue that really successful track record that we've all been able to have, and that the best way to do that is going to be to make sure that when we do talk about these policy changes or make these policy changes, that we do so through a fair, open, and transparent process that'll give us all an opportunity to have input and notice of changes before they're implemented. So thank you for kicking that off with this session today. And I'm going to pass it over to Mary or Patrick.
Yeah,
Thank you. Good
Patrick.
morning. I'm Shattuck. I'm the Executive Director of Rural Edge. Again, appreciate the opportunity to be here. I think as we sort of came together and developed sort of next steps, you know, I appreciate you taking an active role in the oversight and looking at consistency. But as we move forward, it would be helpful for us, and you've heard about our longstanding commitment and know our longstanding commitment to really understand how you're thinking about target households for the programs. And how you see your priorities and see those fitting with both our long-term commitment and the legislature's long-term commitment to permanent affordability. And so I think, you know, we all want to have clarity about who we're looking to serve, so that we're better able to use these programs and work effectively together.
Any other feedback? Jess?
Oh, well, I actually had a clarifying question. Thank you for setting this up. I'm Zachariah Watson. I'm from Central Vermont Habitat for Humanity. Wanted to just start with asking a question. What is, since process has been a big part of this, what is the process for this meeting in terms of recording our comments and how are they being sort of interpreted, and what's the next step?
Yeah, we are recording the meeting, and we are doing that so that we don't miss a word of what you are providing back to us. And we'll be able to use that transcription to assess how that informs some of these opportunities that are coming up, like Deb described the process for the QAP, which is a great and a very immediate opportunity to weigh in on how tax credits are allocated in the state. So the SHOTC side of it will be addressed through that process very, very soon. So we'll be able to take your comments and reflect on how they align with proposed revisions to that. And we'll be able to, if you're able to sign that, the sign-up sheet, will be able to make sure you know when the draft QAP is available for comment so that you can be plugged into that process as well.
And I know, I'm not actually sure the status for middle income program for next year, if it's receiving any funds, but is this input going to be, is there going to be a QAP or something similar for middle income that our comments can be used for that process as well?
Yeah, I think we were envisioning that we would, we'd assess these comments relative to upcoming opportunities to make awards through that program as well.
Yeah, I'll add, Mia Watson, that, you know, the QAP doesn't cover the middle income program, so that wouldn't be directly reflected in the QAP, but, you know, ahead of releasing funding, which we do have funding available for that program, that would be something we could incorporate in the funding guidelines in the application process.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's part of, you know, for us is clarity, certainty. There's so much uncertainty in our world, in the housing world and in the world in general. And so having really clear expectations on process is a big part, I think, for us anyways, in addressing whatever concerns we've had. And so I really appreciate that and look forward to seeing that. You know, I just want to, as Habitat for Humanity, we have I rehabbed the first house we rehabbed, it was $175,000. We're now building houses for almost $400,000, single family homes. The housing world has changed and we are not unique or immune from those issues. And so we have started to pursue funds like middle income housing development and home ownership tax credits. And to be honest with you, we'd probably prefer not to if we didn't have to, but we have to because that's the housing market we're in right now. So we're grateful for it, but it has been a challenge. And the reality is that many of us, the Habitat affiliates are very small. Until this year, it was just me in my office. And similarly to the majority of the other affiliates across the state. And so we definitely, you know, I think it's important, and I know Deb comes from Habitat World, and I'm really grateful for that. Thank you for your volunteerism on that. So for us, we definitely need additional support, additional guidance, knowing that we are smaller, but also a recognition of the uniqueness and the value of what Habitat for Humanity does. We are not traditional builders. We receive discounts, donations, in-kind gifts, and we have a ton of volunteerism that goes into our program. And as a result, I believe that, our homes are much more, they're comparative to homes on the private market are much more affordable, or they cost less to build, excuse me. They're not more affordable. The appraisal still works the same. I think just knowing going into this process, I don't know if there's a way to sort of identify that habitats might be a little bit different. And therefore might need a little bit more support, a little bit more handholding. I know you guys have helped my hand a lot the last 6 months. Thank you so much. I think the expectation, or we might need additional handholding going forward as well. But also, when we look at our tax credits, for example, again, we wouldn't go after tax credits if we didn't absolutely need them. And they're actually a component for matching grants that come from Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston, where we actually get those Federal Home Loan Bank Affordable Housing Program grants. And we qualify for them, we get more points if there's a tax credit match with our member participants. So that's another reason why we apply for homeownership tax credits. But our homeowners themselves, they are folks that traditionally would not be able to afford a home through a traditional lender. So what we're seeing is a big difference between what we have identified as what they can afford, and also what we're seeing from VHFA as what is affordable for those same households. And these are really based on actual financial analysis done by either Rural Edge or Downstreet. It's not actually in-house. These are coming from our homeownership centers who have expertise in these things. And so we know exactly what our homeowners can afford. And like I said, we're seeing a big gap between what VHFA is saying they can afford for a mortgage through the homeownership tax credit program and what we can actually, and what we're seeing on the other side. And so there seems to be a gap there, and I don't know, I don't think we're the only ones who are experiencing this issue, but somehow we need to bridge that gap. We have to figure out why are we coming up with different numbers, and how do we get to the same place? Because I'm developing budgets, I need to be able to put into a budget, grant applications, how much our homeowner can afford. And if it's what VHFA is saying, because that's what we need to include in order to qualify for homeownership tax credits versus what they can actually afford. We may be able to get the grant funding, but then the homeowner can't actually afford to be there. So it's we're creating two different different situations that don't actually work well together. So I think in general, I love the idea of a QAP for a middle income housing development program. Consistency, clear expectations, all those things will help improve our this going forward. And you guys are doing a lot. And if I could say anything else, I'd say you guys need more staff. You can do more. This is a lot. Hopefully there continues to be a lot of money coming from VHFA, because I think we all need it. And I'd like to be able to see us be able to churn out that money, get it out to all of our programs. So I know how hard you guys are working. And I'd say get more staff. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're next.
Hi everyone, Jess, new developer primarily of multifamily housing, so I have like this much homeownership experience, and I don't want to overstep on any of your experiences at all, but just wanted to highlight a few things that I've heard in this conversation and I've seen in the past few months. First, I really want to acknowledge VHFA, your staff, and Deb. I think your framing of this and all of the changes and the escalation, the volume and the growth of the output is really helpful for me to understand why things that feel uncertain. I've never even been through an application program for any of these funds, to be clear, so I feel like I'm coming in pretty blind, and you've been extraordinarily helpful. I also want to acknowledge what you sort of flashed by the putting middle income housing funds into the construction loan. That helps us all. That helps us reduce our construction loan
interest costs like that, that is a big benefit and it has created complexity. I think we're all realizing, but I also want to acknowledge that that's big. And we appreciate that. Some things that I heard from all of the affordable housing developers that spoke that I want to highlight specifically. A lot of talk about needing to be able to lock in the purchase price, and I think there's a difference between how VHFA is thinking about the purchase price as appraised value and purchase price that needs to be advertised to the home buyers as not their total purchase price, but really like what they're getting a mortgage, what they're getting funding for. Those are two really different numbers. And I think I want to focus some conversation and thought around there needs to be certainty in that number of what home buyers are being asked to chip in for. Like we need to be able to market that number. That number needs to be known. Otherwise, we sort of don't know who we're talking to, right? We don't know who the audience is to buy these homes. They don't know what's affordable. We don't know how to evaluate who the market is. That's really important, I think, for that reason, and also the question of the affordability gap and how much subsidy we're going to get. The affordability gap, the state credits. I'm so new to this, I didn't know what SHOTC meant until like 45 minutes into this, so take all this with a grain of salt. But if you don't know the size of your affordability gap subsidy, you don't know how much construction loan you can take out because the state credit equity is a part of the takeout for the construction loan. And so even going all the way back to like building a budget for this, if we can't have consistency, if we can't have predictability and sort of a known value gap subsidy, then we don't know how big our construction loan can be. We don't know how much we can afford to build. And I think, I'm sure there's a solution to that, but I just want to highlight, like, that's another piece of needing certainty in the state credit value. The one more comment and then a question. So it's interesting to hear that it makes sense that statute requires a QAP for the state credit, state homeownership credit. This is perhaps selfish with me as a light tech developer primarily. I would love to see those QAPs separated out because I think they're very different issues. You know, there's going to be different controversies in both, and I think they are both worth a lot of focused discussion, and I wouldn't want to see either of them drag the other one down into delays or controversy that don't involve the other. And in particular, I think it's really hard to think about changes to the state homeownership credit and or the middle income program when they're not being addressed at the same time, because they work in concert. We need them to work in concert. And so I would personally advocate for an ability to there be rental changes on their own and state homeownership changes on their own together. And then finally, thank you for bearing with me on the data. I just wanted to, it seems like, and I was in my car, so I didn't get to see the slides in your presentation. It seems like a lot of the credits have gone to CHT and Chittenden County. And to me, that makes a lot of sense because CHT has the highest value. So there's an affordability gap much more than there's a value gap. And so where there's not middle income homeownership development program funds available, which for the vast majority of this timeline there hasn't been, it's a lot harder for projects outside of our highest market area to develop without access to that value gap. So I just wanted to clarify, like in the kind of distribution of projects that you shared and maybe even more recently, I imagine that there's a very significant difference in the geographic distribution of projects with middle income housing development, you know, that program funding versus projects that are just funded by state credits. And I was curious if that was a correct assumption.
Yeah, I'd say that's true. I'd have to like actually run the numbers. I don't think we've done that since the original awards, and there's been some fallout of just Mia Watson speaking. So I'd say that's generally true. We are certainly seeing more projects outside of Chittenden County through that program, and a lot of those are co-funded. So the ones that will start to come online, we'll see a little bit more dispersion of the state tax credit funds again, I think through the addition of value gap.
That makes sense, yeah.
Dave Mullen from Green Mountain Habitat. Kind of tagging on to what Zach said, Green Mountain Habitat is committed to scaling up. overfunding any one project is in direct conflict with that. We know that funding is finite. And so it's not our goal to overfund any one home, if you will, or project. I would ask you to go and look at that threshold that you're using, 30% of the income. It's my understanding that was last adjusted in 1981. Nothing is the same as it was in 1981. As Zach said, our first house in 1984, the whole house and land was $60,000 in Burlington. I cannot buy a piece of land for that today. So the families that we are working with at or below 80% of median income are not and do not have the discretionary flexible funds that somebody at 150% of median income does. So when the further down you drill, and this is the discussion our board is having right now, because we are committed to putting families into homes that they can be successful in. We can get families into homes because nobody builds houses at a lower price point than Habitat. We can get them in, but we want to make sure that they're going to be able to afford it and take care of it. And more, life and costs outside of your house costs are demanding. And so I don't think that 30% threshold is accurate for families to be able to maintain a home. And so we have this window, 80% of median income, and sometimes we can get down to 50% of median income. I question somebody at 50% of median income can take care of, can support a home when you have to call the plumber at $150 an hour. So I'm going back to, we are not looking to over subsidize these homes. We are committed to doing more homes. But what we are seeing is that it takes more subsidies to enable these families to be successful in these homes. And so that's when we look at this gap funding, we're asking that that be evaluated based on today and based on this demographic of families.
Thank you. Before we go to you, Michael, we have a question from Elizabeth. She's had her hand up for a minute. So Elizabeth, you can unmute.
Yeah, hi, thank you, everybody. I just want to echo everybody's gratitude for Deb and Leslie and Mia. It was really, really helpful to understand the ARPA deadline because as the administrators of the VHIP program, we're very familiar with the ticking clock and how critical it is to meet that deadline. So it was just super helpful that you shared the context of what's been going on for all of you over the last few months. I want to just echo also a couple of other points that people have made and then put a little bit more detail on it as it relates to our market. I think, we're concerned about the pricing issue and how VHFA is going to develop their guidelines around this. And as we were talking this through, Bruce and I locally, we started to look at the difference between AMI as a whole and renter AMI. And VHFA's housing needs assessment actually breaks that down really nicely. And so we took a look at those numbers, and the renter AMI is actually 44% lower than the stated AMI when it includes homeowners. And of course, those are the folks that we're targeting to buy homes. In Windsor County, it's 35% lower. And so when we think about pricing, we don't want to use just AMI as the marker of what is affordable at 30%, people paying 30% of their income. We want to really look at who's actually going to buy the homes. And so that's why we're looking at renter AMI. And that leads us to a lower price point. And I think the data supports that. We also just agree with needing to be able to set the price up front. And I know there's been some noticing that some people are getting subsidies on the buyer side and down payment assistance, and that has been characterized as, over subsidizing. But because those funds are not set up front and are based on all kinds of variables and they're not guaranteed. We can't really rely on that when we're setting our pricing. So I just really strongly encourage any guidelines coming out to make sure that we are able to set our prices up front. And I just don't know how we could sell a home without setting a price. It goes kind of in it's in direct conflict, I think, with fair marketing and all the things that we follow in that area. And then I just want to make sure that there's consistency, and I appreciate that, and predictability, but also just flexibility for different markets. And we're really excited to do some work down here in Windham County. We actually have two pipeline projects, one that's been partially funded and permitted, and we're kind of in a holding pattern, waiting to hear what the guidelines are. And then another project where we have a patient seller. But I don't know when that patience is going to run out, but we have another project that we'd love to get going for home ownership. So I guess the question I have is, when are we going to get clarity on the guidelines? It seems like a long time to wait for a QAP open hearing in April, when we've got projects that we want to get moving and get housing built. So I just want to get some clarity on when we're going to have those guidelines so that we can start putting those pro formas together with actual guidance from VHFA. So thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Good question. Oh, Michael.
Yeah, hi, Michael Monty, Champlain Housing Trust. I would say that this row is more like I'm not online over there and I'm not somewhere in the middle. But thank you for this. Thank you for providing this information. It's really valuable, and thank the nonprofit colleagues for coming and talking to this. Let me do an old man's metaphor. You know, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The best time to plant a tree is today. And I think the shared equity program broadly is there in effect to ensure long-term affordability. You know that. This is simple, right? But what does that mean? That means this year we sold 35 homes that required zero subsidy community loan. That's pretty big. That provided opportunities for people who move into homeownership, who now are moving into other forms of homeownership or doing things with their lives. That's not in your calculations necessarily. It doesn't show that. And that investment, at least I didn't see that. So I would urge you to think in those terms as well. And it's hard. You know, if I picked 2008 was the or the mortgage rates from the 80s as being like, oh, these 3 years were horrible. How could you do anything? It's almost impossible to build any housing. We could talk about how cheap it was back then. We could talk about the barriers back then too. So it's always going to be like a point in time. It's going to be a set of conditions, and right now costs are a set of conditions. And the difference between your affordability and the other stuff. That's where we're facing that, and we're doing everything we can to leverage every other resource we can to do it. What you're hearing, I think, from most of us, that we can't really plant trees if we're not paying attention to sort of some of the details that we're sort of bouncing up against. So we urge you to sort of think about how we can continue to do that, because that provides, again, homeownership for 35 folks. Imagine across the state, a larger number of folks. That is an important need out in the community, and it preserves neighborhoods in Burlington. It provides opportunities in Winooski. It provides the homes in St. Albans. It has value throughout, not just Chittenden County, but Northwest Vermont, if we sort of resell homes. I would love to see that in the context of the calculation of things. It costs money to build tax credit rental housing now. It's crazy. Should we stop? Do we need the subsidy still? We do. And I think that's what we need here in terms of the context of the homeownership, in terms of making it work. So I urge you to continue to sort of do that.
I'm gonna join the old man chorus here. And one of the things I've heard over the years at the VHFA is that when we were struggling in various places, is that developers always hear the echo of the last bust. And I know it's been a while since we've seen a bust, but we've I've been around long enough that I've been through, I think, three, maybe four. And so I think there are two different things that we're trying to deal with. And one is what does a homeowner need, and the other is what does a developer need, and they are really two different things. And I urge you, as you heard the concerns raised around the table about being able to set price, to think about that, because as Andrew said, when you have holding costs, they can get expensive fast, and it can look like failure within the community if they can't move a home quickly. I can recall 3 different times that Evernorth, then Housing Vermont, did home ownership, and they lost money on each one despite their sophistication in Dorset, in Stowe, and here in Montpelier on Mary Street, where they just hit the market at the point of the financial meltdown. And so and I can imagine that happening again. I agree completely that we need audit trails, but we also need predictability. I guess I would also say to you, as somebody who worked in community action for a decade before I worked here, is that the notion that Reagan brought to all of us, that we wanted people to max out their rents or their incomes for their living costs, is not one that I've ever been supportive of. I've seen throughout my career people who were just one catastrophe away from just devastation. And so I think the notion that everybody needs to be maxed is not the right one. But I'd also want to say, and I know we only gave you this data yesterday, look at the resale data, because as Michael said, people who invest in these homes and put their hearts into them, and in the case of Habitat, put their sweat equity in, are also giving something to the next generation. And this is as important as anything else, is an anti-gentrification tool. You look at what's happened in Chittenden County, even in the old North End, those islands of affordability are just really important in the future, as they become available upon sale. I think the other thing, which I've always heard John Davis talk about in terms of community land trust, is it's a balancing act. There's lots of competing interests trying to be met. The obligation to be able to sell a home quickly when somebody needs to move on is really paramount. Our communications director's family decided last summer they needed to move to Europe for a whole lot of reasons. And Downstreet sold her home in a matter of weeks, and I can't tell you how much of a stress reliever that was for her.
It was 2 days.
It's 2 days. All I know is the relief on her face the next year. She came in and said, my home is sold. I didn't have to worry about that. So the model gives a lot of benefits beyond immediate affordability. I'm not sure you said this, Deb, but I think if there's a concern that the tax credit program is not supposed to cover value gap, I think that's something that we should probably ask the legislature to make sure you're specifically authorized to do. I haven't read the statute to know that you can only do affordability gap, but I think that in some ways the value gap is part of the affordability gap. For me, but if you think we need a legislative fix to that, then let's quickly go get it. I'm pretty sure that the relationships we have with the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee are strong enough that you and me and Elizabeth talk with her. She'd be very supportive of that kind of an adjustment. I think we also just need to acknowledge that there's more funding. If I could go back in time, of the 16,000 plus homes we've invested in, I wish there were another 1,000 or 1,500 that were shared equity. I think part of the problem we're seeing in terms of geographic distribution is how hard it is to do this at small scales across the more rural parts of the state. And I think that what developers tend to do is to do things that they know will be profitable, not things they'll lose money at, unless there's going to be backup for them. So those are a few thoughts on this. And I just want to acknowledge Ariel, who I think looks at every single one of the deals that we fund, and that's probably 90% of the things that you do with clear eyes. And I want to thank you for the report on the resales that we distributed this morning. So I think that really just needs to be factored, as Michael said, into our thinking of what we're doing for the long term.
Instance.
Me? Okay, thank you. Jonathan Goldhammer, Green Mountain Habitat. I just wanted to echo again, Zach and David have talked about this, and I think number one, everybody in the room has acknowledged pricing up front. That would be huge. We have to have it. We're dealing with AMI of, 50 to 80%. Out of the last 15 homes that we've built, one person has gone into a home that was ready to under 50% of AMI. So when we look at the gap between who we're serving as Habitat, who qualifies, who is ready to purchase a home, we're really looking at 60 to 80% of AMI being the bulk of the applicants that qualify, that are financially viable to own a home. So that makes it difficult when, if we tie a tax credit to an AMI for a certain property with a price up front, and then revisit that at the end and say, well, it looks like they can afford it, so we can't contribute to it. And I think that uncertainty is going to drive us from building more homes, because applicants are going to drop out. I'm not sure how fair housing law fits into that as well. So I would want to make sure that we're not trading anything on making sure that we're picking applicants based off of a tax credit that they can receive. So that's one thing. Number two is that David mentioned we're ramping up. We want to build more homes. So we're developing this pipeline. Right now, we already have 45 homes that we want to start within the next 5 years. Developing a pipeline of up to 94 homes that we could possibly build in 15 to 20 years. We can no longer buy single family lots to build one home. We need to build duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, or purchase properties that are available that are going to be able to build multiple homes. So as we look at that, we look at infrastructure costs now going in. The costs are driving up because there's no longer these single family lots, and now these larger subdivisions or PUDs that we're producing are going to have added cost upfront, and also that those tax credits can help drive down that cost in the end to the homeowner as we share the cost of the infrastructure across the whole project of 7-9 units. So we are building, just so everybody's aware, Green Mountain Habitat does serve Chittenden, Lamoille, Franklin, and Grand Isle County. So we pair with Downstreet and Champlain Housing Trust. So I did some quick numbers, and it looks like that if we would go back to the rate of subsidy that VHFA was providing, let's say 3 years ago, we could possibly, with the 94 housing units that we could have in the pipeline, we could be, VHFA could contribute $4.3 million. VHCB could contribute $13.1 million at the current rate. But it's going to cost $30 million to build all those homes. So when we look at where we are now and where we project ourselves in the future, I think we have to have certainty to move forward to purchase properties that are $600,000 and carry that cost until these houses are complete. So the pricing up front, again, is the piece that qualifying these people is key. And we really can't get into changing the price of the home right at the end of the sale.
Questions, comments?
I had a question. In regards to middle income housing, the ARPA funds, you all said that the legislature had set a 30% goal for shared equity. Do we know how close we are to that? And I was also curious, is that just shared equity, or is it, does it dictate whether it can be done value gap versus affordability gap?
I think it's shared equity projects overall. I don't think it attaches to a specific amount. We need to rerun the numbers. We've had some fallout since the award, so we made sure the initial award was. When we make the next round, it's really going to be, I think primarily or entirely sort of reallocated funds after projects have fallen out. I think we've done predominantly shared equity. There's only a few sort of smaller non-shared equity projects, but I need to rerun it just because it's changed significantly since we awarded it. Does that answer your question?
As best you can.
Okay, yeah, I have to relook into that.
Can I just ask questions?
Can you remind the folks on Zoom who you are?
Yes, yeah, Jeff Newell again, developer with Evernorth. This is just purely curiosity on my part. It sounds like VHCB gets a fair amount of resale information and maybe not affordability information on those resales, but VHFA doesn't. Like, what's the tool that you use or don't maybe have access? Like, can you talk about why you don't have that data? Maybe, and if there's like a solution for that, because that does seem like a huge analytical.
I think we're looking at ways of improving. I think that my understanding is that we had expected to receive it like when the resale occurred, but we did receive it when I asked CHT for data. Julie's shop was able to provide me with like a one-time dump of like the resale data that they had.
Yeah.
But I don't have any for the other homes developed across the state. And we should just get it, like, we just need to just
Institutionalize the process.
And we're implementing some data systems at VHFA that I think are gonna help the developers input data directly into the system going forward, so.
Well, we haven't had a standalone mortgage covenant on the project, so that would be triggering us to be notified automatically at the time of the sale, so it's just dependent on.
Yeah.
The sponsor to remember to do that, and.
Yeah, and now you have the mortgage needs. Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Introduce yourself again.
Of course, yes, Julie Curtin, Director of Homeownership Champlain Housing Trust, and just to build on the discussion of data, we're very happy to continue to work with VHFA and VHCD to share the data that we have. And, you know, be it to look at resale data or also to get to some of the questions about underwriting and pricing that would provide the predictability so that in an application pro forma, we understand what the VHFA is looking for underwriting. We do have very specific data on what actual housing costs all of our buyers have. So to look at affordability, I think across the portfolio, that would be very helpful for us to dig into that data together. What we've seen across the 130 some odd homes that have state tax credits in them is that they are essentially hitting that 30% mark, not all of them, but on average across the portfolio, affordability is where we want to see it. So just standing offer to roll up our sleeves and do data together. And then just also to acknowledge and the appreciation for really everyone in the room working together. I'm reading your questions here, and I hope we get to keep digging into these questions because they're the type of questions I'm thinking a lot about. And in my role as trying to support homeownership for the people we serve, and by we, I mean all of us, we really work together to cover the state so that these services are efficiently deployed. We're not, stepping on each other's toes, but we're making sure that there are no gaps in coverage around the state. And we are trying to figure out together how to build more affordable homes and do this in models that are that use the limited public dollars that if we get them for home ownership, they may not be available for rental or the like. We want to make sure that the pie is as big as possible for everyone. One thing that we are working together on is a scaling for homeownership grant application, a competitive process through Capital One that some of us and the shared equity space have put together, and to work more with habitats and to really see those partnerships flourish statewide. And I think it would be really great to be talking with the VHFA about how we can. If we get that award, wonderful, but if we don't, we still want to do this work and we can't do it without you, so we want to do it together. So I just wanted to really emphasize the importance of these partnerships for spending more time having these conversations and looking at how we can create more affordable homes for all of Vermont.
And we've got a comment from Bruce. Bruce, you are welcome to unmute your side.
Hi, everybody. Bruce Whitney, Wyndham and Windsor Housing Trust Director of Home Ownership. I guess echoing a lot of what people have said, but maybe the fine point to add is, the need versus demand. Elizabeth talked a little bit about, our target market is renters. Their overall AMI is lower than the gross AMI in the population. And the other part of that whole demand thing is there's only so many renters ready to buy when a house comes on the market. I mean, one of the things the home ownership centers do is educate and counsel homeowners so that they are totally ready to buy. But even there, there's the market funnel just gets really, really small, and then that speaks to the overall risk of developing homes. And people all the time lose money, go bankrupt, developing homes. So just the fine point there is as much consistency and clearness and, defining again the final purchase point is really, really important. So thanks.
Bruce.
Zachariah Watson, I meant to mention this and I forgot, but the covenants reminded me, we didn't experience this, one of the other affiliates experienced this, where the covenant that was attached to the homeownership tax credits reduced the resale, the AMI for the resale to, I think, 60% or something like that, which was different than what was in the VHCB covenant. And so I think moving forward, having part of that consistency is making sure that subsidy covenants have the same language would be really helpful. And also knowing that might be something that happens is you might change the resale AMI. So that.
Nobody else has anything. I just want to, acknowledge there's a lot of details for us to figure out, and I think everyone's committed to doing those or to working towards that. But just generally, how cool is it that we're even having this conversation? That we've got an entire group of people talking about permanently affordable home ownership in the state of Vermont. Like, if you look at the rest of the country, this is not a problem people are grappling with, or they're definitely not this far along in that conversation. So I'm just generally grateful to be among a group of people who are talking about this and who are really committed to make it.
Other thoughts, feedback, questions? Anybody on Zoom? We're almost at noon. This is this was the right amount of time for we needed. We plan to, I think what we should do is use the transcript to summarize the points that we made, the transcript from the recording. So we'll make that available. We will make the slides available. So let us know if you want any of that. Sign up on the sign up sheet and we'll make sure that you get information about future meetings and opportunities to comment on QAP and other developments in this space. Yeah, that QAP is coming right up. Like, it is almost March and it will be finalized this summer. So it is a really wonderful opportunity to incorporate these comments into policy that affects how the state homeownership tax credits are distributed. Anything else, Deb, Mia, Jameson?
Thank you all. I appreciate all the the carefully and thoughtful remarks and the coordination. What a group. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for making the space and for bringing us together to listen to them, but really appreciate it. Thanks again to VHCB for having us, who's been there.
We should have called.
And everybody can get together.
That's everybody online too.
Thank you.